Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, Governor Josh Shapiro made education, particularly K-12 education and higher education, a major part of his incoming agenda. We'll get to that with a couple of organizations representing professionals, teachers, and others in school districts and in higher education after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, let's start first of all with K-12 education. Joining me is Aaron Chapin. He's the Vice President for the Pennsylvania State Education Association. As I indicated before, we're going to hear from organizations that represent people who actually provide the education day to day, both public higher education and in K-12 in the schools there. Well, Aaron, I'll tell you, Governor Shapiro made a big point about teacher shortage. He even went so far as to say, I have a program for nurses, police, and teachers, $2,500 a year in tax credits, right, for people who become teachers. First of all, what's the situation with the teacher shortage that would prompt that?
Well, thank you, Terry, for having me. And the crisis is real. I've been a teacher for 30 years, and I've never been more concerned about education in Pennsylvania than I am right now. And we're not just talking about teachers. We're talking about school psychologists, school nurses. We're talking about education support professionals in our offices, the school buses, and in the cafeterias. There's a real crisis right now, and we need to do something immediately, or this is going to have devastating effects on public education in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the factors that are driving this. I mean, we just don't have college folks entering the education profession.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We aren't seeing the number of younger people entering college to be educators like we once saw. I mean, over the last decade, we've had first-time teaching certificates drop by 66%.
Wow.
And that's just devastating. And it's not a matter of retaining the educators that we have right now. It's always a concern, but the true thing that we're concerned about is that younger people just aren't getting into education like we once saw.
Yeah, you make a good point. It's not a fact that teachers are leaving the profession. It's attracting new people into the profession. That's the driving force. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you know, there's barriers that are preventing them in this current day from getting into education. Most of all, it's the cost of earning that teaching certificate.
Well, that leads to a very important question. What do we do about it? What should the state do about the teacher shortage?
Well, and the great thing is that there are easy solutions for the legislature to enact in Pennsylvania, which would be raising the minimum salaries for educators and support professionals in Pennsylvania. We're proposing that they raise the minimum teacher salary to $60,000 a year and the hourly wage for support professionals to $20 an hour, which would keep us competitive with our neighboring states that have already enacted these. But it also shows the great value that these individuals have when it comes to our school districts and our communities.
Yeah. And you also mentioned other professionals. It's just not teachers in the classroom. There are a whole series of folks vocationally who supply important assistance to teachers in the classroom, but it goes beyond just teaching in the classroom. It goes to physical as well as mental health, correct?
Absolutely. We have so many professionals and support professionals in our schools that play such a big part in helping our students be the adults that we want them to be. And you know, it's not just teachers in the classroom. We have nurses and our psychologists and our counselors working to help provide mental health techniques so that our kids they're able to grow. A lot of our kids right now are grappling with depression and anxiety, and we just don't have the people going into these professions anymore, and the kids need it so desperately.
And there's some, I think the governor made this point about whether folk children are showing up for school and having not had any breakfast, not nutrition concerns.
There's no doubt that Governor Shapiro is deeply committed to our schools in Pennsylvania. He's made it very clear over his time as Attorney General, and he's continued with that commitment. He's made kids a top priority in Pennsylvania, and within his budget, there was $1 billion that he's proposed going to our schools, but some of that money, there's $100 million just for helping the mental wellness of our students. And that's just amazing on behalf of our governor.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to ask you about whether there's bipartisan support for his $1 billion education funding that he's proposing. And then we also want to talk later in the next segment about vocational education programs as well. Back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, Aaron, let's continue our discussion about the teacher shortage and the possibility of a pay raise. Democrats and Republicans, are they on board with this from what you can tell, determine?
Well, I'm really optimistic about the chance of this happening. If you just look across the nation right now, this is a trend that you see in states that are run by Republican governors and Democratic governors. If you just compare like Arkansas and New Mexico, they've enacted $50,000 minimum salary, and if Arkansas and New Mexico can pull this off, there's no reason why Pennsylvania can't do it as well. I think it's a bipartisan issue here in Pennsylvania. I think people on both sides of the aisle recognize that our public schools are vital to Pennsylvania, and that we need to do whatever we can right now to attract the best and the brightest to teach our kids.
Well, it seems to me that the attitude coming out of Harrisburg, out of the state legislature, is, as I've indicated, is not virulent. It's not attack the other side. It's sort of let's sit down and chat. We had State Senator Scott Martin on the program, and that's what he indicated, and that's good news. They can disagree, but they have to work out the disagreements.
I agree, and look, I've spoken with numerous legislators on both sides of the aisle, and they're committed to our students, and they're committed to doing whatever it takes right now to address the staffing shortages that exist in our schools. And I truly believe that they will come together, and we certainly aren't, it's not an issue of money as far as our school districts are concerned. This is something that the legislature can afford and should be enacting.
Well, it's also about the future of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Let's face it, if we need to, if students don't learn in the schools, if there are teacher shortages and that creates problems, think about that, what that does, not just for the economy of the state, but the personal lives of these young people.
Absolutely. And again, if you want to have a great community, you need to have a great public school. And I know that the legislators in Harrisburg recognize that, and they want to make that happen.
All right, the Department of Education has made it clear that there'll be a vocational education program, K through 12 training. Take it.
Well, it's a great opportunity. As you know, kids in high school, they're trying to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their lives. They're exploring what opportunities are available for them, and this is a great program that would allow them to get that experience in school, in a school setting, and at the same time, they're figuring out their future, but they could also be earning credits, making it a little bit more manageable financially if they were to go into education in college. So it's really a win-win situation.
Yeah, I mean, as you accurately point out, this is about their careers as well. and positioning themselves for a career. And so this opens up other opportunities for it.
Absolutely right. Perfect. It's just a perfect program to give them those experiences that they need.
Yeah. Well, finally, overall, are you optimistic about what you do and about education?
Oh, I think education in Pennsylvania, if we address the concerns that we're having right now, I think we're going to have a great future as far as education is concerned. There are some things that we need to address, as I talked about with the minimum salaries,
Right.
but we need to attract more and more young people to education, and we need to break down those barriers that will allow it. For instance, we have a lot of support professionals in our schools that would make outstanding teachers, but
Right.
there's barriers preventing them from getting in, and we need to break
point.
those down and have some grow your own programs.
All right, thanks for coming on. All right, coming up, we're going to switch from K through 12 to public higher education. It's extremely important in the state, both in terms of the students and learning and their futures. It's also important to the economies in the regions of the state where the public higher education institutions are located. Back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, from K-12 to higher education, we're going to talk about public higher education, the state system of higher education in the state. Joining me to do that is the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, Dr. Ken Mash, who's a professor.
Political science at East Stroudsburg University.
There you have another colleague in another way. All right, Ken Mash, I don't think there's any doubt about it that the public universities, there are 14 campuses, are educationally, we're going to get to that, but I mean, they are hugely important to the economies of the region. Many of them are in what I call small town and rural Pennsylvania. They're hugely important in terms of the overall jobs that they produce, just supplying the students and other personnel and the system itself, correct?
Yeah, most of our campuses are the #1 employer or #2 employer in the counties in which they reside. So as we have seen reductions in workforce, reductions in the numbers of students, we start to see also in those communities struggling. And it's, we look at a place like Clarion, Pennsylvania, where, it was bustling at one point. Now you could really start to see the difference and it has an impact on, people who used to rent to students who can no longer rent to students. And then what do they do with the housing stock that's available there? Or the local businesses who depended upon students and faculty, because there's been reductions in the number of faculty and staff at our campuses.
Well, and that we just, as you heard, to talk about the K through 12, the teacher shortage and how serious that's become. All right, let's talk about Governor Shapiro's budget. He proposed I thought this caught everyone as a surprise, only 2% increase to fund the public school, higher education institutions.
Yeah, so we very much supported Governor Shapiro in his campaign, and I think our folks were very excited about him getting elected. And of course, with the 2%, and everybody looks at it, it's like an increase, but when you measure it against inflation, it's actually a cut for us because we're not going to be able to keep pace with inflation, and we are facing difficult times. And the solution for us to move forward, and for the chancellor and for the board of governors, the hard choice they have to make is, well, if the money isn't going to come from the state, then it's got to come from the students. We may have to raise tuition for the first time in, I think, 5 years to make up for the gap that's going to exist. And of course, that's awful because college costs are already too high. And Pennsylvania is already only 48, it's 48th among the 50 states as far as funding for public higher education. So we're faced, we've been going through this for years and years and years. So I've had members call me up and they're upset about it. But by the same token, I take the governor at his word during his budget address when he said this is the start of a conversation. And from my conversations with legislators and with people in the administration, I think that's true, that this is the start of a conversation.
So are you optimistic about getting the budget increased, given the fact that there's a surplus this year in the budget?
So Terry, we've met before. I'm never optimistic about anything. But I'm certainly hopeful, and I don't think it's, I think it's realistic to think that there's enough legislators, there's enough we can do to provide information to the administration and to the legislature to have that increase to a more reasonable number.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about possible scholarship programs to assist that. And then the governor also has talked about rethinking public higher education after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
Well, I need to point out that I'm senior fellow in residence for political affairs at Millersville University, and I was on the faculty for 37 years. And I also held Ken Mash's job more years ago than I'm going to talk about. So I want to make sure that's evident and clear as well. All right, well, let's talk about scholarship programs to make higher education affordable, or more affordable.
Yeah, so I was listening to what Aaron said earlier on about the crisis for teachers, and we do have a crisis with regard to teachers, but also nurses, social workers, and others. The state system has proposed creating some scholarship programs at our universities to try and encourage students to go and enter into those fields. As you know, our universities, when they were first colleges, and before that, they were teachers' colleges. So we have a long history of training teachers. And we need to get back to that, and one of the ways we can get back to that is by making it affordable for students. And you and I were talking earlier, and when you were a professor, when you first started in the early 80s with ABSCA, the Commonwealth was picking up 75% of the cost of college. Well, now we're down to around 25%, maybe even less than 25%. So the burden has really shifted to the student to pay for this. And of course, the students that we serve are the students in the working class. And those are the students that are the most, and their parents are the most vulnerable. And they're facing, a mountain when it comes to student debt if they're going to go. The students who are, below the poverty line, there's money from the federal government. When you're, if you're richer, you can afford it. But it's really those students that we serve that are being starved out.
Yeah. Well, let's shift our thinking a bit here in our conversation to Governor Shapiro called for rethinking of the state system. What's your understanding about what that means?
So my understanding is that what he's asking for is for us, and when I say us, whoever he's calling upon to create some commission to look at the entire higher education landscape in Pennsylvania, because we have a large number of colleges and universities, which really should be a draw for Pennsylvania that we have so many. But I think it's more looking at how these universities work together, who are they serving, making sure that when we do things collectively, we're doing it efficiently and effectively to best serve the people of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that we'll have to wait and see what the legislature does, but there's certainly, given the budget surplus, now I comment all the time, make this point, this year, there's concerns in the out years, as they say, there'll be deficits, but that's going to get increased.
I just don't think that people have a big enough appreciation for how starved our universities have been now for a long time. We've been underfunded really since Ed Rendell was governor, and Governor Corbett came in and he slashed our budgets, and then Governor Wolf eventually slowly built it back, but
yeah.
the money that we're getting now is where we would have been at before Governor Corbett slashed it, but that's not adjusting for inflation or anything. That's just in the total dollars that are there. So, you know, we've seen dramatic cuts, and we think that our enrollment issues, that to the degree that we've had them, are largely because college is so expensive.
Yeah, on the whole business of scholarship programs, Governor Shapiro's budget did it say anything? And I didn't think it included that. Am I correct?
No, it did not. And then again, that's part of our larger conversations about, you know, get those scholarship programs, funding for the state system, and even looking at some what we're calling legacy debt that came when some university presidents built dorms in the early 2000s, expecting that enrollment would grow and grow and grow, but now they're left with the bonds and paying those off.
Yeah.
So,
is there any pressure, given this concern in our state, not just the teacher shortage, and after all, that's places, I think, a heavy burden on the public universities, as you accurately point out, which began as teacher institutions and still have teacher education programs. What's the pressure going to be like to fulfill that need?
well, I think it's going to be big to try and to attract students. That's why, as an organization, we continue to support the Pennsylvania Promise, or some sort of Promise program, which we're seeing in all the surrounding states here, that if your family income is below a certain amount, like $150,000, that you would get your first 2 years of college for free.
Yeah.
And we're competing with that. It's cheaper for students in the upper tier in Pennsylvania to go to SUNY schools in New York than it is to go to our campuses. And you know, you can't sustain this forever. We're going to need credentialed people. We're going to need more people with college educations if our economy is going to be where it needs to be for us to be successful.
Okay. Thanks for coming on and providing us with an update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, you stay well.